If you're interested in learning about the best openings for Black, then stick around, and by the end of this video, you'll know Black's 4 best ways to start a game of chess. Now, I do want to go ahead and put out there, this is primarily targeting beginners in chess. These openings score very, very highly across all levels overall. As a higher rated player myself, I play this in speed chess games, and I'm surprised by how often my opponents will fall for some of these opening tricks. So stick around, you will find something applicable here, I guarantee it. Now, we're going to start with responses to d4 real quick, because that is the more annoying opening to face. The solution to facing d4 players is to surprise them with e5, the England gambit. Now, especially at the beginner level, people are not familiar with the theory, and at the advanced levels too, they don't really care to look too deep into the theory. They forget things very easily. What's common enough is everyone's going to take, and if they don't, by the way, if they don't take, then you get to take, right? If they play a developing move like knight f3 or e3, knight c3, you can always just take on d4. If they push the pawn, well, you get to keep your pawn on e5, so that's pretty nice. But by far the most common move here is they take, and the first line here we want to look at is bishop c5. Alright, quite a strange move, but we have a good bishop, and you can see we have an eye on the f2 pawn. That is pretty key here. Now, most common reply is knight f3 by a good bit. Now you want to play d6. Another somewhat strange move because you are giving up another pawn, and they're going to very quickly capture. And this is where we get to the tricky part. But you have to play this move very quickly, because if you hesitate and you think, they will probably know something is up. Your best chance to make this work is to blitz it out and get them to think that you pre-moved it or you were just going too fast. So you want to play the shocking knight e7. And the trick here is if they capture the knight, and most people do. Most people capture that knight. It falls into bishop takes f2 check, deflecting the king away from the queen. King takes bishop is required. You capture the queen, and this is a very nice position. You're attacking 2 of their pawns. Their pieces are very poorly developed. Their king is on f2. It's just a very good position. You are going to win the vast majority of your games if you get to this position. Now, if you don't like the idea of playing knight e7, then that's understandable. If you would prefer to capture the pawn with the bishop here, that is totally playable as well. Or even after knight e7 is played, if they do not capture the knight, you can fall back on taking the pawn on d6, and that's still going to be a playable position. Not as good as if they fall for the trick, of course, but still quite playable, lots of space for you to work. Now I want to go back to move 1 for our next opening to examine. We are once again going to start with an England gambit, but we have a different continuation here. Perhaps a bit more sound if you do not like the first idea. So here, in our second opening, we want to play d6. Alright, so instead of playing bishop c5 first, we are going to play d6, and they are going to capture. Mostly everybody does. And your reply is not to gambit another pawn, although some people do. Some people actually let them take on c7, but that does not score super well. Unlike bishop takes d6, most common by far is knight f3. You respond with knight c6. The reason we're doing it this way is because we want to quickly go bishop g4, queen e7, and castle queenside. You see, the way we played this opening is we opened up the d file, and we're gonna castle long and get a rook on d8, the same file as their queen, the same wide open file. So we are setting ourselves up for success and some good tactics. Common move here is knight c3, bishop g4. Now most people will play e3 here because they do not want to just sit around and let you capture the knight and double the pawns, or at least that is the prevailing thought process for white in these positions. They don't want to let you double the pawns. So they play e3 so the queen guards it. Now you are not going to take that knight, nor was that your intention. You are going to continue your plan and play queen e7. The whole point of what we are doing here, we gave up a pawn earlier in the game to open up the d file, to castle queenside, get a good development, and get a good attacking chance. Common move is bishop to e2, and now you castle queenside. And if you are fortunate enough, your opponent will blitz this out and castle, and that will fall right into takes. If they don't recapture, great, you're up a knight. They will recapture though, and then you go bishop takes h2 with check. Now it's up to them if they take it or not. It doesn't really matter because you grab the queen, they get the rook, but look at you, look at that, you're up material, just like that. You have a queen for a rook and a bishop. And while that is not, it's not like it's game over for them or anything, this is certainly very appealing to the person with the queen. I would hate to play this position with white. You know how quickly you're going to get your knights activated. Knight e5 right here looks pretty sharp. You could get your queen over to h4, bring your knight to f6. You could potentially push this pawn up the board. There's a lot of play here, a lot of good chances. If you get this position, you should be quite. Now, that concludes two of the top 4 best openings. They against d4, that's how we're starting this. Those openings, those continuations, both score very, very well. If you don't believe me, you can do some research for yourself. There are open databases online that you can find. I would recommend the Lichess database. If you don't like the look of these lines, you could play around with it against a computer, put it in analysis, see what is most played, try it out and see if you like it. At the very least, you will find a high win rate and high success in speed chess, because people will blitz through and miss all the tricks. Even in slower time controls, people will not be able to resist taking a hanging knight, for example. So definitely try this out and let us know in the comments below how it works. Now we're going to shift back to move 1 here, and we're going to look at the best options against e4, because that is the more common move on move 1. So on e4, recommend responding with e5. They're going to play knight f3. We're going to play knight c6, and we're going to be looking at most common responses to bishop c4 here, because that is what everybody seems to play for the most part. Now, first and foremost, I'm going to recommend something pretty interesting. It's called the Rasu Gambit. We play f5 here. They are not supposed to capture that pawn. Most people do, by far. It's very hard for people to resist capturing this pawn, thinking, oh, well, after e4, I move my knight away and I can get away with it. That is the thought process here. We play d5 here, and notice how dominant and controlling our center is. It looks pretty darn good, that's for sure. And now they have to figure out what to do with the bishop. Most people very quickly play bishop to b5. Now we have the very nice queen g5, targeting the g2 pawn. Now that's not fun for them to deal with. In fact, the correct way for white to play this position and keep it fine for them is to go knight e2 and give up the g2 pawn. Very much not the human response, that's for sure. The human response, the most played move, is bishop takes knight with check, and of course you're going to recapture, although funny enough, king d8 is probably playable enough, because then if they retreat their bishop, you take on g2, but I don't recommend that. Just recapture, keep it simple. Now most people will play g3 to protect that pawn. Now you simply go queen takes f5, you get your pawn back, and notice this, you have a dominant center, an active queen, and the f2 is looking really, really weak. I mean, you should be planning to play bishop c5, perhaps bring your knight this way, maybe it comes to g4 later. You're going to castle and have a rook on f8. f2 is a very, very easy target. You're going to be very quick to attack that, and they have to be very careful not to just fall apart. So that is the appeal in this line, and also the most common way for it to go. So check out the Rasu Gambit. I think you will find that you like it. Now I want to go back to move 3, bishop c4. If you do not like the idea of playing f5 in that position, which it does come with some risk, of course, as do any gambits. If you don't like that, you could go with something that appears more sound, with knight f6. And they largely will play knight g5. And your response to knight g5, it tends to vary. Most people play d5, which does not go very well after knight takes f7, and then you're losing. Either that, or you play the main line after d5, and you're just down a pawn. So not very appealing. There are other options, though. There's the Traxler counter gambit, which is extremely risky, because if they play it properly, as most people are learning how to do nowadays, it backfires tremendously. If you want a lesser known line with a very, very high win rate, I recommend knight takes e4. Now, of course, this does come with its fair share of risk. If they play properly with bishop takes f7, you go king e7. This is still, you can see the evaluation bar there. It's +1 for white. However, one wrong move is all it would take for that to change. In fact, if they do a predictable move like taking the knight, we capture the bishop and it's already equal again. And we are very, very quickly going to play d5 and just have a commanding center. It's going to be quite pleasant for you. So even that's not much of a concern. They would have to play all the top engine moves to keep the advantage, and that's just not likely to happen at all. So we're going to go with the predictable responses. The main 3 replies in this position tend to be knight takes f7 or knight takes e4. And there's one other, I think queen f3, which, I mean, you can just capture the knight, so that's pretty good. So let's look at knight takes f7, because that is the most common. And your reply to knight takes f7 is going to be queen h4. So we're setting up a pretty blatant threat here, in that if they capture our rook, we're going to checkmate them. So obviously that looks pretty appealing. If they do not do that, there are 3 main replies here. So some people will play g3, and this is going to lead to a very quickly losing game, because you capture that pawn with the knight, threatening the rook. Their best move and most replied move is f takes g3. Makes sense. And then you have 2 ways you could play this. If you wanted to, you could grab the bishop, and that would be fine. However, If you want to play the more dominating move, you go queen e4 check. You're going to take that rook on h1, probably with check as well. Now, if they make the mistake of playing king f2, thinking that the queen guards the rook, well, then you get to go bishop c5, and they are not going to love that. Here, put that on the board, actually. Bishop c5 check. If they move their king, then it's going to be coming back this way, in which case we take the rook with check anyway. If they block with d4, you're capturing with the bishop, and it's the same scenario, except maybe this time they give up their queen, which we're not complaining if they do so. So most people properly play queen e2, but then we capture the rook with check. And again, if they go king f2, we just have bishop c5 check, and that's going to be a real pain for them to deal with. So the proper response is queen f1, and in this case, we trade queens, we throw in d5, so now if they capture the rook, we capture the bishop, and then the knight stays trapped in the corner. So we're all good there. If they simply capture the pawn, that's okay, because we have time for check, and they're going to move the king to e1, and you go knight b4, threatening the bishop and c2. And the neat thing about this is they go back to b3, you capture anyway, because then when they recapture, you take the knight. So that works itself out pretty nice. Now, back on move 5, g3 is just one of the replies. What about queen f3? Well, this is probably the worst of the main 3 replies, because you play knight d4 very quickly. And they are in a whole lot of trouble because they have the queen in danger, they have the c2 pawn in danger, and also the queen has to remain guarding f2. And the best way for them to do that with a queen move would be queen e3, which falls into knight takes c2. So what most people play is knight d6 check, recapture with your knight. You're up a piece here. So that's already just very, very good. Now they play queen d3. We're going to capture the bishop here too. We're up 2 pieces. And the reason that is if they recapture with the queen, we have knight f3 check. Discovered attack on the queen. When they get out of the check, we're going to capture the queen and we are simply winning. So a very nice continuation as well. Now, back to move 5, the final and better response of these 3 options. Far, far safer, try to protect the king. But we have a good continuation for this as well. We play bishop c5, putting pressure on f2. So if they turn around and capture the rook, it's not going to go their way after knight takes f2, attacking the queen. Chances are they will try to move the queen away, maybe to e2, for example, but then knight g4 with the discovered check, and now the threat of queen h2, which is going to be checkmate. That's rough. They should not take the rook. If they do, you're winning very fast. Now, the most common reply here is queen f3. That's not going to slow us down. We are going to play knight d4. So we're revisiting the queen f3, knight d4 idea. What people try to do here, and they do stop themselves from getting checkmated at least, they play queen h3. But this is not a very good game. We are going to take. They, of course, are going to take. We play rook f8. And now this knight is running out of options, right? So they're going to have to take on e5 if they want to keep that knight. But then we just have knight takes c2 with that rook trapped in the corner. Material is equal right now. In another move, we may just be up, so that's quite nice. So there we go. That is the best way for that to go. If they, back on move 5, after queen h4, it's always g3, queen f3, or castles. Those are easily the top 3 moves in terms of how often they're played. They make up a large majority of games from this position, so that's quite nice. Now to go back, it's possible they don't take on f7, they may take on e4. Now this may appear to be more straightforward. You play d5, forking the 2 pieces in the center. Whatever they do, you're going to take one of those pieces, and then they are probably going to recapture. It seems like most people like taking the pawn, and then you recapture. Material is even here. You're not going to get the same sort of tactics in this continuation, but basically the point is you ruined their plan going after f7. And also, now you have a queen active in the center, you're going to be slightly ahead in development. You, unlike them, have a center pawn, so there's not really much to complain about here. You could very quickly play bishop d7 and get castle queenside. They'll probably kick your queen out, but you have a nice square on e6 to go to. Maybe they'll castle, maybe you'll castle. Opposite side castled game, you've got good attacking chances here and a very high win rate, so I absolutely would recommend that. So there you go. That's all I got for you. Congratulations on learning the 4 best openings for black. Again, as I said earlier, this is primarily aimed for beginners, but you can try this out even if you consider yourself a stronger player, because a lot of people fall for these opening tricks.